Welcome to Democracy News Live. This is a Maiden University webinar series being conducted, and I'm your host today, Burzen Wagma, at the School of Oriental African Studies' South Asia Institute, Center for Pakistan Studies, and the Center for Iranian Studies. It has been a year since the Indian government amended Article 370 to make way to formalize Jammu and Kashmir's official association in a new setup with the Indian Union. The phase has been marked with multiplicity of debates over the future of Kashmir. Notwithstanding the region's history and geographical positioning between the People's Republic of China and Pakistan, which makes any political solution subject to regional contestations. In today's discussion, we look forward to brainstorming potential strategies for reinvigorating the alliance with like-minded democracies from the Quad recently formed with the United States and Japan. And concomitantly, we will explore the measures needed towards engaging the youth through innovative channels of participative democracy. My guests today are Mr. Javed Trali, a political commentator and analyst hailing from southern Jammu and Kashmir, and who is also a political activist, as well as president of the Jammu and Kashmir Policy Institute. Dr. Satoru Nagao, currently visiting fellow at the Hudson Institute, and also concomitantly with the Japanese Self-Defense Forces as a first lieutenant. He has been a visiting scholar at the Indian Military Review, as well as the National Security Studies Institute in Sri Lanka, and an alumnus of Gakushuin University, where his thesis on India's military strategy was the first in Japan. And of course, last but by no means least, we have Mr. Ike Freiman, a Harvard alumnus, magna cum laude, as well as author of One Belt, One Road, Chinese Power Meets the World, which was just published by Harvard University Press, his alma mater no less, in April 2020. Mr. Freiman is currently a doctorand at the University of Oxford, Balliol College, where he came after a MPhil from the University of Cambridge. So, gentlemen, perhaps we could commence with all of you producing an opening sentence or two for at least give or take 10 minutes. And then we could take it from there in brainstorming and counterposing policies and points. Dr. Nagao, could I commence with you, please?
Okay, thank you very much. It is an honor to join this conversation. I received two questions from organizers, so along with this question, I try to reply in next 10 minutes. The first question is why the Quad Alliance was conceived for the coordinating effort by the US, Australia, India, Japan in maritime sphere. Do you think the Quad could potentially promote India's commitment over Kashmir? This is the question I received as the first question. My simple answer is yes. Quad security cooperation is counter-China cooperation. So if China involved Kashmir, Quad will support India in Kashmir. But in this case, another question we can imagine, does China come to Kashmir? For example, 20 brave Indian soldiers sacrificed in Ladakh. Why? In Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, there are many Chinese soldiers. They have already come. But why? So when we see the map, we can find the geographical importance of Kashmir. Kashmir connected with Pakistan, Afghanistan, Xinjiang Uyghur, or maybe East Turkestan, and Tibet. For a long time, the people focusing on the route of the Islamic extremists from Afghanistan or Pakistan to Kashmir. But this is not only route Kashmir connected. If China need to move from Tibet to Xinjiang Uyghur, they need to cross Aksai Chin of Ladakh. And Ladakh was a part of Kashmir in the past. So, and if China need to go Xinjiang Uyghur to Pakistan, Pakistan occupied Kashmir is route to go. So recently China is focusing on this geographical advantage of Kashmir. So why China focusing on the geographical advantage of Kashmir? We need to identify what China really want to do. To understand what China really want to do, we should check the map. So today I prepared some slide. Could you please share some slide? I have already sent, I think.
Yes, of course. Sure.
Shared? I cannot confirm. Maybe organizer side will share some slide I sent. Because I do not know how to use this software indeed.
I believe the Delhi studio should be able to mount it in a minute or two, Dr. Nagao, but if you could perhaps just proceed, even as they get it going, perhaps, as to what you wanted to explicate vis-a-vis against the cartography.
Okay. Maybe without the map, I need to explain. So I need to explain what kind of map. Okay. So you can imagine what is vital for China's security. If you imagine the map, we can imagine the sea lane of communication from Middle East to China. China's economical development depends on the sea lane of communications that runs through the US-controlled Malacca Strait from Middle East, Indian Ocean, and enter the Malacca Strait, and cross the Malacca Strait, enter the South China Sea, and go to the Taiwan Strait and enter the coastal line of China. But this Malacca Strait, if US Navy blockade, it would bring the China's economic activity there to a halt. So China called this situation Malacca dilemma. What kind of dilemma we cannot explain, but they use this word. So this is Malacca dilemma, very important for China's security. So to deal with this situation, what China want to do? To mitigate the risk, China has created new energy route or trade route from Middle East to China through Pakistan, through Myanmar. Do not cross the Malacca Strait. So Middle East, Pakistan, China, you imagine, Kashmir is en route. So China has motivation to deploy troops to Kashmir to secure their route. That is the reason China is expanding in Ladakh and Kashmir.
Perhaps, Dr. Nagar, if you could, yes, thank you for that very good overview. It's most sound and relevant. But perhaps if I could ask you against cartography, and of course looking at the near abroad, also to focus more on Kashmir per se itself. We would like to hear your views on that, insofar as how the Quad would actually, come to secure India's interests on it. Now that Canberra has been brought on board and New Delhi okayed it for the recent naval exercises, which will be conducted off the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, if you could perhaps, I know against as you just explained the Malaccan dilemma, which is very sound and relevant, but perhaps you could dilate more on and devote more on the Kashmir angle, so to speak.
Yeah, because this alternative route is the land route from Middle East. They cross the Indian Ocean but enter the port in Pakistan, and they go in the land route in Pakistan and enter the Pakistan occupied Kashmir and enter the Xinjiang, or cross the Aksai Chin to enter Tibet, or they go the deep inside of the Xinjiang Uyghur to go the more central area of China. So this is the route.
Yes.
So Kashmir is the route. So, but the view from China that they try to try to defend this route, what should they do? They need to deploy the troops. That is the reason I try to explain this route. To avoid to use the Malacca Strait, this route is vital. And under the Belt and Road Initiative, they start many infrastructure projects. And the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor project is part of the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. So that is the reason Chinese troops stay in the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and develop infrastructure and protect infrastructure. China also deployed some troops in the Pakistan itself. And in the Ladakh, especially Aksai Chin. Aksai Chin is very important to connect the two areas, Tibet and Uyghur. Is this a proper answer of your question, or are we completely different?
Yes, right. Thank you very much, Dr. Nagao. Mr. Brahman, could I perhaps turn to you for your opening remarks on how you see the situation panning out, perhaps?
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be on a panel with Dr. Nagao, who I know, and such an interesting collection of other colleagues, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I would begin by making this point. American views towards China have modulated significantly over the past 3 years. When Donald Trump was elected president, very few people thought that they should take seriously his promises to impose tariffs on China and to begin a process of economic decoupling. But now, if you look at what the Biden campaign's top China hands and national security aides are writing, it seems that they agree with the Trump administration on much of the specifics and what the strategy should look like in confronting China, both in the Pacific region and in the Indian Ocean. So I think there's an understanding in both political parties in the United States that India is a crucial ally in this new process of, shall we call it, containment of China. India, as the world's second most or soon most populous country, and as the world's largest democracy, is clearly an essential linchpin of the United States strategy in the Indian Ocean. But there is a deficit of capabilities in India as regards a military capacity. In terms of naval capacity, clearly the United States needs to pull most of the weight on behalf of the Quad in the Indian Ocean. And on land in Jammu and Kashmir, as we saw during the recent confrontation, it seems quite clear that India does not have conventional military superiority, and that China, pretty much at its whim, has the capacity to force a conflict and to force Indian forces to retreat. So this is a strategic problem for the Indian government. It's also a problem for the United States, which would like to stand with its partner, but which recognizes that any direct India-China conflict in Kashmir is likely to result in a face-losing loss for India. So I think the challenge for both the United States and the Indian government going forward is to find avenues where they can cooperate in areas where they can win. Maritime security is one. The Indian government should probably consider upping its investments in surveillance and reconnaissance along its coasts. It should consider bolstering its naval capacity. The United States would like to turn India away from focusing solely on the Pakistan challenge and begin to play a role as a responsible rule-enforcing and law-abiding actor in the region. I would make one other point which I think is quite relevant. So I have just finished writing this book about One Belt, One Road, Xi Jinping's legacy project, which Dr. Nagao mentioned. It consists largely of infrastructure projects around the Asia-Pacific region, but it also has a political component, because as part of these large mega projects, China transacts with local patronage groups, with local politicians and political parties, and it wins friends and learns to influence people through these deals.
Precisely.
I think for too long, the Indian government has kept its head in the sand about how effective One Belt, One Road is at winning friends in South Asia. We've seen it in Sri Lanka, where the Rajapaksa regime was pro-China, but Rajapaksa's major political adversary, Mr. Sirisena, is now reconciled to China as well. We've seen it in Pakistan, obviously, but we've seen it in countries like Nepal and Bhutan, countries that in other circumstances might have been very concerned by China's rise, but which, because of long-standing historical problems with India, have realized that they can use China as leverage, as a counterweight against Indian influence. And so if we go one by one through the SAARC countries, I think that Indian strategists must recognize their soft power, their ability to influence on a political level, is far less than what it should be. And one of the priorities for New Delhi going forward, and I think one of the top diplomatic priorities for the Quad, is fixing relations with the SAARC countries in order to maintain its regional security and in order to do what has to be done in Kashmir. India needs to abide by international rules, and it needs to signal to the SAARC countries that it can be a reliable and trustworthy partner, and that India should make a better partner than the Chinese. And until the Indian government can offer that value proposition, essentially offer a better deal to the countries in its neighborhood, I think it's going to be very difficult to form any kind of united front against the Chinese. And I think India will have very few friends in the region with regard to its policy in Kashmir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fryman. Cogitating Kashmir as literally the namesake for our title, and as you asked us to cogitate on what at least New Delhi ought to consider in its near abroad with its other SAARC member states, where relations do bristle every so now and often, as you have pointed out. Yes, I suppose that is something to take on board. But also one must realize that, and as you know only too well from your own writings and that of others, that some of the Sri Lankans have come to rue with what has happened at Hambantota, and also the Maldives. And Maldivian parliamentarians, so one is given to understand, off the record, needless to state, have even said that 100% of their GDP has been, well, quite frankly, with the family silver auctioned off, and they don't quite know what has been signed off to be in hock to Beijing. Maldives, of course, is potentially one of the most acutely affected of all the SAARC countries, but only time will tell how this would, as it were, pan out. Thank you very much again. Mr. Trali, may I turn to you, please? And perhaps you could afford us a bird's eye view with the advantage of a domestic springboard and of things as they are on ground. Please, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be, with such a distinguished panel this time. Basically, if we see, if we see the situation in Kashmir this time, so it's not something something new that we see. So we have been seeing the situation here since last 30 years. Okay, so but the only difference that we see now is that the violence has considerably it has got down when we compare it with the rest of the years in the past. So that is I guess the biggest takeaway of the situation that has emerged after the abrogation of Article 370 last year. So now that's done. That's history now, and we look forward for some positive forward movement as far as the situation here is concerned. So for that matter, it is very important that the government starts the political process. It has been like now. 2018 that we had the elected government here. So since June 2018, so it has been either governor's rule or it has been the president's rule. Now the LG is heading the government here. So it has resulted into a lot of vacuum in terms of the disconnect between the people and the administration. So that's quite dangerous thing, because we see in such a situation we don't see if one party or or the second party, suppose getting advantage. Second party, I mean, like, suppose for example, National Conference or the PDP or the Congress or the BJP getting advantage of that situation. So it's not that case. Though the vacuum is being filled by the progressive ideologies, and that's quite that's
That is
quite
alarming, right?
alarming. That's quite that's something that the place can't afford. That has been marred by the violence this last 30 years. So the immediate need, I think, is that the people are feeling frustrated, they are feeling disconnected, they want they want to be heard. So for that matter, they all only thing that's missing is something, some roadmap ahead, so that they can relate to that and ensure that the place becomes peaceful, and it is on the in the path of progress, and uh, in the coming time. So for that purpose, I think it is important that the new kind of politics that has to emerge here after post abrogation of Article 370. So it is important that we have the leadership, so that grows, that emerges organically, from the ground. So that emerged from the people. So it's not something, you superimpose something on people, and so it's all that always has the credibility crisis, so credibility crisis, and it can't relate with the people actually. So it's important that it's allowed, that the process is started as soon as possible, so that we can have functional assembly here. We can have the government is back, in the hands of people. So it's not that that it's the common Kashmiri, who lives in valley, or the people in Jammu. So they have their day-to-day issues, day-to-day problems. So it's not possible for a bureaucrat, for an officer in office, to just to address those issues for people. So for that purpose, we need public representatives. That's very important, at this juncture. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult with the passage of time, if it is being lingered on. The situation is kept like this, for long. So this is.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Charlie. Needless to say, of course, things would have taken a pace, but for COVID-19, which of course has affected everyone adversely. But I was just thinking, perhaps as you would only know too well, that certain changes have taken place in the Union territories now, a year on. For example, central laws and state laws have been fully applied, and former PRC holders are now eligible for domicile certificates, including hitherto discriminated categories. There has been a recruitment drive for jobs. Power departments have been unbundled, in the sense that 5 new corporations have been set up. There has been, I believe, a universal health coverage extension, as well as structural reforms carried out across industries, particularly the Apple industry, since the Apple farmers and the Apple lobby, if you will, were clamoring for assistance. And as you have rightly pointed out in one of your articles, that the former administration was not quite sensitive to what the farmers were clamoring for. And agricultural sales and output had plummeted, particularly on the apple and saffron crops, which are two very important crops for Jammu and Kashmir. I do remember that, a very insightful study. Perhaps now I could just also mention, for my part as a moderator, that looking at the international scenario, where I would, looking near abroad, that there tend to be analogies drawn between Tibet and Kashmir. But of course, if I could set the record straight on that, because clearly there is no such analogy that can really be erected to summarize and situate both situations. provinces. For example, the fact that Tibet was actually invaded by incoming Marxist-Leninist forces in October 1950. Hitherto, Tibet was an independent state from 1911 till 1950 is something which we ought to bear in mind. And also, pursuant to the PRC taking over Tibet, it must be noticed that territories of what were the erstwhile Kingdom of Tibet were parceled out to Gansu, Yunnan, Xikang, Sichuan, and other provinces of the PRC now. No such thing of the sort has taken place in Jammu and Kashmir, which does remain intact as we speak. Nothing of the sort has happened in the Indian Union, where historic territories have been parceled out to other states as such. And of course, on a more serious note, it is something to be noted that according to Marxist-Leninist socialist evolutionary theory, of course, the Han Chinese constitute the default category of citizenship. And from that thinking definitely stems intrinsic discrimination, in that it is deemed that other nationalities, minority and ethnic groups within the PRC, are deemed temporarily and even culturally or politically backward and regressive compared to what would be the Homo Siniticus, or like the Homo Sovieticus in the USSR. And of course, that discrimination, which is very, very evident through the politics of exclusivism in Tibet, unlike Jammu and Kashmir. Perhaps I could now turn to another point. Dr. Nagao, could I also posit this to you as a question on Kashmir? Are there any common threads how both US and Japan perceive Kashmir? And is there a scope for some improvement, especially as India's goals have become not just ambitious, but also reasonably achievable? And how could India utilize her international standing and alliance networks towards this objective? What would you propose?
My simple answer is, firstly, the common threat is China and the terrorist, Islamic extremist. So both are the common threats, we believe, not only in India, but also the US and Japan. And about the second question, is there the scope for some improvements, especially as India's goal has become the ambitions, but achievable? In this case, about the two answers. Firstly, about destroying peace in Kashmir. In my opinion, any conflict will end. So India can restore peace, but I do not know when. That is my answer. And about China, it will escalate more soon, I think, because China is escalating the situation, not only this area, but also the other area. So, due from this tendency, they will escalate more in the near future. And about the third question, what can we do? Especially, can the US, Japan do for the Kashmir? After restoring peace, the foreign countries can support the infrastructure projects in Kashmir for local people. Because this is what happened in the India's northeast region. In the northeast region, Japan invests in infrastructure projects to connect India and Southeast Asia, but at the same time, to strengthen the border defense, Indian Army can use this infrastructure too. So, viewed from this situation, Japan decided to support India's infrastructure project in northeastern region. But without the security, Japanese cannot enter, even if Indian side asks us to do. So, destroying peace is very important. That is my answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Nagao, Mr. Trali, and also Mr. Eichmann, could I put this to you? India's stance on Jammu and Kashmir a year on is deemed in most capitals as a fait accompli, but also as an internal matter. Do you concur that Tokyo and Washington, for instance, do regard this as an internal administrative matter, as has Abu Dhabi, for instance, and also Riyadh, speaking as it were from the OIC side of things? Either of you, Dr. Nagao and Ms. Fryman, might take this up one after the other on this particular query of mine.
Sorry, because of the technical issues, voice is up and down now. So maybe something I cannot catch. So could you please repeat or summarize the question again?
Yes. What I asked you is that India's stance on Jammu and Kashmir a year on after the abrogation of the Article 370 has been deemed and looked upon by Tokyo as well as Washington, D.C., and other Western capitals, including Berlin and London, as an internal administrative matter. In a word, an internal affair. So Tokyo perceives it like that, and obviously by default then recognizes it as an internal matter, and that is India's stance on Jammu and Kashmir has come to be recognized by Tokyo. Am I correct on that? Because that would seem to be the case also with Washington, as I mentioned, as well as with Berlin, and also with Abu Dhabi and Riyadh, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, both of whom have officially declared it to be an internal matter for the Indian Union.
Yeah, there are a variety of views in this case because view from Japan, Japan will not intervene in the internal situation. And in the United States, left and right has a different opinion. Right side, India is very important in their counter-China strategy. In this case, the human rights issue, the democracy issue, related issue, maybe right side can wait. But left side like this issue indeed. So this kind of issue, so because the left and right are different, which side is more important, security or human rights? So to restore peace, security is very important. But at the same time, the respect to human rights is very important. The right side thinks the security is more important relatively, but the left side thinks the human rights issue is more important. That is the reason the opinion in Washington is a little divided. Currently, the president is Trump, so and the Republican takes control. So this means that right side. But if the next U.S. president election, the President Biden, Biden will be the president, the Democrats will control the government. In this case, compared with the current situation, they want to raise this issue, human rights issue. So that is maybe difference. Even if the inside of the United States opinion is different. In Japan,
Right.
will not intervene in internal situation.
Thank you. Mr. Fryman, could I perhaps turn to you on the same line of inquiry?
Of course. So I think Dr. Nagao has actually laid it out quite clearly. There is a partisan divide on this issue. As I pointed out before, there is a bipartisan understanding that India is an essential partner in the global, new global rules-based order that Washington wants to build, and they are also a vital partner in the strategic effort to manage China's presence in the Indian Ocean region. But that is on the most macro of levels. When we start looking at the finer details, as we know, there are many hiccups and problems in the US-India relationship. I don't think that the United States has ever particularly wanted to insert itself into the debate between, or the conflict between India and Pakistan over J&K. So the United States has always preferred, I mean, look back at the historical examples of this in the late 90s and the early 2000s, has never wanted to intervene. That said, I think there are many in the Democratic Party who believe that India is taking an illiberal turn under Prime Minister Modi. They note, I believe that there was the longest internet shutoff of any democratic country in history in Jammu and Kashmir during the annexation. There are a number of concerns about the treatment of Muslims, about freedom of expression in India. And I think that if Joe Biden and his team are elected, starting in January, the United States is going to start taking a very different line towards democratic allies and partners that have some non-democratic aspects in their domestic politics. And I think there is going to be a lot of pressure that Washington will bring to bear on New Delhi to follow international norms and best practices. And I think based on what we've seen over the past year, that is likely to include a change of policy towards J&K. Now, New Delhi will have the choice whether or not they want to accede to American pressure. And they may determine that this is simply too high a priority from their domestic point of view, and they're willing to take the consequences. But the United States-India relationship is complex. And while there are many areas of overlapping interest, there are also areas where the two countries' interests do not so clearly overlap. And I would not be surprised if the Biden administration used sticks as well as carrots to try to pressure the Indian government to move back from its illiberal turn.
But I suppose one can concomitantly then put out that also one raises the bar for democracies, which are accountable polities, in the case of both India and Israel, where one can't raise the bar with other states where clearly it's more in the breach than the observance. And sticks and carrots, either of the options may not work, as any political dispensation in DC will obviously tell you. But also, one may also point out not just there are hiccups in the India, and it's complex, as you quite rightly put it, the Indo-American relationship. But I suppose India has always, and those in DC and the Beltway have come to realize when dealing with India, that it will, shall we say, not concede on its so-called strategic autonomy in foreign policy decision making. For example, one aspect of this complex Indo-American relationship would be New Delhi's very amicable relations with Tehran. And much as the US has wanted to wean it away from Tehran and gas supplies and the like, India has held its own and concomitantly maintains that it can have a friendly relationship with both Tehran and Washington, regardless of the political dispensation, whether the BJP or the Congress or any other government in question. So I suppose India may regard this as a question of strategic autonomy, but also any incoming administration in DC may have to realize and refocus on the calculus of what may unfold in Afghanistan. And perhaps that might lead them to recalibrate as to what is to be done. Because clearly, I believe India has totted up the score and taken that into account insofar as securing Jammu and Kashmir, but also Ladakh goes. Mr. Charlie, could I perhaps turn to you, for instance, and besides the international dimension that we covered, and the local processes which are very important, could you say a thing or two on empowerment of youth, as it were?
Yeah. So, I guess in any civilized society, any functional democracy, that youth is a very important force to not only reckon with, just that's something that we have to trust and we can trust. So, as far as the young lot of Kashmir is concerned, so usually we say that Kashmir is a political problem. Some say it is a terror problem. Some say it is a security problem. Some say it is a religious problem. But I usually say it's a matter of dignity. It's a question of dignity. It's a question of dignity. So the young people here they have the aspirations like the young men who live in Washington, who live in Tokyo, who live in New Delhi. So they have the same kind of aspirations. So they want to move ahead in their lives. So they want to just be part of the processes that makes them better, their lives better, and the lives of their place better. So all they want is that they need to be respected. Their emotions need to be respected. It starts from a policeman on the roads and an officer sitting in the office at the top level, or a politician, a politician, whether he is in opposition or whether he is in the government. So he expects him, her to respect him, to give him the dignity which he as a human being and which he as a Kashmiri deserves. So that is very, very important that, when we ensure that, when that's ensured, the respect and dignity for the young men of Kashmir. So half of our problem is, solved. So then comes the part of engagement, the part of creating safe space for them. For example, I will tell you, when we say that, we need to engage our youth, we need to just, take them away from violent ideologies and all that, and forces that who exploit their, that innocence and so, but we don't have the required infrastructure to engage them, to put them, like sports infrastructure, quality educational institutions at the native place, like institution that will empower them through through skill development, etc. So and there's nothing, that concrete from the, even from the government, that how they are going to address the youth bulge, like, what kind of imaginative thinking is there to engage the youth, to give them the dignified job. So
I think you're right, Mr. Charlie. In when you point, sorry, what I meant is, I think it comes down to, shall we say, dignity as the reverse side of the coin, and uh, 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 also with disaffection on the obverse side of the coin, and both can be tackled. But having said that, there has been, shall we say, since 1952, what Kashmiris have experienced, procedural democracy. The term is used in political science and in histories of the recent past, which has been in place. It has been a vibrant civil society. It is not exactly something which needs to be started from scratch. Not just at the, shall we say, the local civic district or sub-tier level, right up to the state level, there have been regular legislative elections, universal adult franchise. So Kashmiris are more than steeped in it, which possibly can't be said for most other parts in the near abroad of Jammu and Kashmir. So I suppose it is disaffection that in the recent context that needs to be tackled. And I'm glad that you rightly pointed that out, for which we would like to see how things do pan out after this pandemic comes to pass. And one can only
yeah,
hope for the
let's
best.
let's hope for that.
It only remains for me to thank all my panelists, Dr.
Thank you.
Nagao, Mr. Fryman, and Mr. Charlie, and wishing you all the very best, even remotely working, and perhaps see you at a future venue and in happier times soon. Thank you very
Thank
much to all of you.
thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank
And to our listeners and viewers, thank you all the same.
Thank you very much.